Did you manage to have a look at it?
So it's a very good vibe.
All it is
Is it all right?
Can you hear me? Hi. Now. Okay. Well, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. So this is the Disruptive Bytes series of events here at the DMLL, the Disruptive Media Learning Lab in Coventry University. And today is a very special day because we are celebrating with this event the Open Education Week, which is involving institutions and educators and learners from all over the world. So we are live streaming and we will engage also hopefully with an online audience. I'm very happy to welcome today Leo Havemann and Javiera Atenas, our two guest speakers. And we will start with Leo talking about embracing open educational practices in the higher education sector. Leo works as a learning technologist in Birkbeck, University of London, and he focuses on providing pedagogic and technical support for technology-enhanced learning. He's also a coordinator of the M25 Learning Technology Group in London. And his research interests include open educational practices, skills, literacies, blended learning, and technology-enhanced assessment and feedback. And then after this first talk, Javiera will be talking about the use of open data as an educational resource. Javiera works at UCL, coordinating distance learning programs, and she's also an associate lecturer at the University of Barcelona. She's one of the coordinators of the Open Education Working Group of the Open Knowledge Foundation, and she holds a PhD in education, a master's degree in library and information science, and an MPhil in knowledge management. And she's also a fellow of the Higher Education Academy. So each presentation will last around 15-20 minutes. And then after that, we will have the opportunity to ask questions to them. And we have also two members of the lab who are interacting with our online audience. So if you are there out in the cyberspace, feel free to ask questions, and then Kul and Luca will be formulating these questions on your behalf. So, Leo, the floor is yours. Well, you already have to.
I think I'm mic'd. Great. So thanks very much for that lovely introduction. Wonderful to be here. I hope everyone who's here in the room is comfortable on the grass. You look like you're here for a picnic, so that's lovely. And yeah, we were just discussing how this it creates a nice vibe when you're going to give a presentation that people look very chilled out. So that's nice. Great to be here today. I'm going to be talking about open educational practices, which probably most people have some familiarity with this term already. And I guess it's a bit of an evolution of the open educational resources movement, in the sense that now people are thinking more in terms of practices, about the people who do things, rather than just the resources that people create and use. And this really stems from quite a bit of research that I've been doing with Javiera. So we're definitely partners in crime in the open education research over the last few years, and so we'll be talking about our own distinct angles, but it's kind of a lot of stuff that we actually work on together. So in terms of this idea of opening up academia, I wanted to start with a question that I'm then going to answer, sort of is openness digital? Because we definitely very much associate this idea of everything open with digital technology and with the use of technology in education, in research, in the sector. And so is the openness all about that? I think that we don't have to see it really as quite so limited, although the digital has meant that openness has expanded in various ways, and it's taken on new forms. So if we think back to earlier moves to open up education, we can think of the creation of the Open University when there wasn't the internet. We can even think about the establishment of the institution where I work, Birkbeck, which you may or may not know is nearly 200 years old now, and was created for the purpose of providing an opportunity for really for working class people to do higher education in the evening, and it still remains what we're doing today. So so there have been different ways of trying to open up education, and the advent of the internet has really been a way that that this can now occur through kind of new routes, and possibly, there is often, as with anything technological, there is a lot of hype around how this is going to sort of save the world, basically. And this is one of the qualities of what's sometimes referred to as the OER movement that some people are a bit critical of, is that it sort of says, oh, if you make all these resources and then everybody has access to them and then everybody can have an education, it's great. And as we've been seeing over the last few years, it hasn't really been that simple. It's not really so straightforward. Maybe actually people need a bit of teaching as well as a bit of resources. So so with the digital, we are now seeing a transformation of academic work that is seeing academics sometimes opening up teaching and learning resources, also having to engage a lot with the open access agenda in terms of research. Also universities opening research data and sometimes running open courses such as MOOCs and that kind of thing. So definitely open education has been transformed quite significantly by the digital, I would say. So why then open educational practices? What's the usefulness of this piece of terminology? Well, I'm going to quote the International Council for Open and Distance Education, the ICDE, who says these are practices that support the production, use, and reuse of high-quality open educational resources through institutional policies, promoting innovative teaching models, and respecting and empowering students as co-producers of their own learning. So I think there's quite a few interesting ideas in there, which are not it's not just one thing. And I think also that more and more we're thinking about how open educational practices may in fact be beyond these things as well, so that it's limited to, because this is quite an OER focused definition still. But anyway, I think that's quite a useful starting point for thinking about what these practices involve. And so really, as with all of the different open movements, which include the open access to research, open data, open educational resources, open science, open pedagogy. A lot of the core of these concepts that's shared is around transparency, is really around working openly, and so I've sort of mentioned a few of those ideas there. So it's also once people start thinking about doing things in a more open way, it's not just about an open access journal, but maybe even about doing open peer review of the submissions to the journal. You know, so it's quite interesting how the open is sort of taking on a life of its own and transforming aspects that weren't initially seen as something that needed to be open. And yeah, but so what else in academic practice could be seen as open practice? This is quite an interesting area, because for many people, open is really about using open licenses. And so they don't see something as really being an open practice unless you're licensing something for other people to be able to freely access it and repurpose it and redistribute it for their own reasons. And I tend to think that that's quite limited. I think that I can understand exactly why people think that is good practice and why that's a great thing to do. But if you're talking about practices in general, these are not only content. And I think one of the important arguments that's been made for talking about open educational practices rather than just about resources is that we're thinking about what do people actually do and how do they do it. And if you think of an example of MOOCs, which I'm sure everybody is familiar with, then you might have the sort of the more famous recently style of MOOC, what are known as the X MOOCs, a very content-driven MOOC where the content may not be actually openly licensed, but where it has open enrollment for anybody who wants to join it and participate in it, to be able to, that they're allowed to be a part of it. So I wouldn't say that because the content of the MOOC isn't openly licensed that this is not open education that the people are doing. I think that's quite limited. I also think if you think of the original MOOCs before we had the very content heavy, the very sort of corporate style of MOOCs that came along, we had what were known as the connectivist MOOCs, which were founded much more on the idea of facilitating conversation among participants and this idea that the community is the curriculum. There wasn't really content other than the contribution made by the people who are participating in it. I still think that that's open education, even though it's not necessarily something that somebody's licensing. So really, I think this idea of transparency is a nice way of thinking about how could we consider something to be open. I think that's quite core to open. So in terms of what all of these practices are, it can be thought of as a kaleidoscope of practices, really as, you know, there is a whole lot going on here. We're seeing the sort of exhortation for scholars to be connected, digital and open. So really it's all about learning a whole bunch of skills, knowing how to use various systems, as well as sort of absorbing or finding your own way through a philosophy of kind of open practice and how that fits in with what you want to do. So, you know, it is kind of challenging then, but there are benefits, or at least, you know, so we are told. Expanding access to knowledge, developing and strengthening communities of practice, being able to use and reuse, and the reason that people talk about reuse means repurpose, or to, you know, to change an existing resource. High quality resources. It's a way of promoting innovative and experimental pedagogies, and really actually even of trying out experimental pedagogies. So all of this is, if all of this is so great, then why is everybody not doing it? I think in a way I've suggested that when I was talking about how it's a kaleidoscope of complex practices already, but thinking, you know, drilling down a bit more into it, we have to think about how there are technical and skills barriers sometimes for engaging in open practices. Some of the research that we have done previously was into how people make use of repositories of open educational resources. And we were studying the repositories and understanding whether they actually adequately support the kind of practice that they're created for. And there are quite a lot of things, quite a lot of elements that are often missing from the repositories that don't really support open practice in a kind of ideal way. So for example, if you want to license the resource, sometimes there is no way of doing that. If you want to put your authorship on the resource, sometimes there's no way of doing that. Most of them do allow you to have keywords. I was trying to think of some of the other features. It's very uncommon that they have peer review of resources. So you know, these kind of flaws in the kind of technical infrastructure that should be able to underpin these kind of practices are not helping people to engage in it. They're not necessarily making it a frictionless kind of transaction for people. And I think that this relates very much to the idea of literacies, of digital literacies, or even what we might even think of as an open literacy, which is you know, you can't necessarily quote me and say that's a real thing. I've kind of made it up a bit, but you know, these are definitely the open literacies, if we want to think about them that way, rely on other literacies, as they're all quite interconnected. But the commitment to openness itself represents a kind of a challenge, represents a set of kind of arguments and also knowledge about licensing and this kind of thing. So I do think that there's a literacy question there. And also, I think in academic culture, it doesn't necessarily always lend itself to openness and sharing in a pedagogical context. It's like, it's absolutely great if you want to present your research to people and say, this is what we found out about this, and this is what we now know about this, and you know, please read my paper and please cite my paper. But it's much less normal to say, this is how I've taught this topic. These are the resources that I've used. This is the part that I've struggled with. This is the part that I think is really good. You know, I mean, people have done research into this, and there's definitely that behavior does go on in kind of smaller networks of colleagues, but it's definitely not something that people are overly comfortable with bringing to a broader community all the time. So that's something that I think it would be great for people to get better at. But also, this is a question of, is there enough value really being given to innovative and impactful teaching practices? Or is that seen as like, that's great if you want to do that, but that's kind of not going to be your main focus. So the last slide is really just a few resources that you might be interested in following up, and we'll share the slides later on. And I'll hand over to Javiera. Thanks very much for listening.
I think it's, can you stop? That's me.
Yeah. At the end, so after the second presentation, we can put together. So please.
There? Yeah. Hi, I'm Javiera. I work for UCL. So I'm going to talk about open data as open educational resources. Open data is basically any type of data sets that have been produced under any type of open license. Why I say any type? Because it's not just Creative Commons. According to the OECD, every person should have equal channels for participation in a democratic society. But we have to enable those channels. And universities, academics, researchers needs to provide channels and a vinculation between society and democracy. So people can participate in a society having access to the same amount of information. Open data is data that can be freely used, freely reused, redistributed, and share alike. One of the conditions of the open data definitions is that open data is universal. Means there is no restrictions. Want to use it for commercial entrepreneurship purposes? Fine, do it. Want to use it for research? Fine, do it. There is no barriers in accessing or using open data. That's what makes it universal. Of course, Open Knowledge Foundations have nicely defined it. It's available for everyone. Should be used, redistribute alike for anyone. You can intermix it with other databases. You can mix the metadata with the data and create new data sets. You can use it for comparative studies. You can make it to contrast different realities. And it's universal. Anyone that wants to use open data from anywhere in the world should have the right to access this, because in a way or another, within the right of access to information, open data can be considered a human right. It's the data that your government produces. It's the data that your local authority produces. It's actually the data that you produce as a citizen too. So there shouldn't be discrimination or against any person, any groups of people. When we talk about, and Leo beautifully explained, when we talk about open up education, we talk about, and as Leo defined it a long time ago, and I think it's a beautiful definition, silos of openness. There is open education, open, and it's a growing sort of a living entity, the open movement in general. Every now and again, a new strand of openness comes alive, and you have, oh, a new member of the family, welcome, but now what we do with you. And it's a bit of what happened with the data. We were talking about, since the early 90s, about open access to information and knowledge as a part of the human rights. Everyone should have access to education. Everyone should have access to quality resources. Then suddenly it was like open access publications, then the open education movement. Then within the open education movement, you have the OER movement. Then you have the MOOCs, open courseware, open practices. So every now and again, we will welcome a new member of the openness family. But how we work together, how we make sure that as a family, we collaborate. And this is what we're calling open up education. And now we're integrating data, but how we integrate the data into the teaching and learning side of openness? By just monitoring student analytics, maybe, and what we do with the data that we get from students' analytics. So, or how we open from teaching research methods, for example. What do I do with the data I collect from my own research? Do I share it with my students, or I just give them my paper? Do I give them my paper in open access, or just publish with a commercial publisher and then don't provide easy access to my students? So it's all a little bit interconnected. For me, what's the value of open data for scientific communities? Is the only way that people in developing countries or in different realities can make comparative studies. If I want to compare the reality, for example, from Brazil with Indonesia in recycling, similar countries, similar environment, similar weather, how can I access that information? Do I have to pay a subscription to a database to access information that should be published by the government under transparency laws? How can I reproduce science? How can I make sure that the experiments in the labs are valid? How can I make sure that my government is spending the money wisely and fairly? I can reconnect a university with a society by using open data as teaching and learning materials. We had a beautiful conversation on Friday, and our colleague Tim Colin from Open University said it's time for the academics to stop using false or fake examples. You can use data and have a real life example to teach your students in any strand of the knowledge. Where open data comes from? Almost everywhere. International agencies, the World Bank, the United Nations, the European Union, international courts of justice. Data comes from everywhere. At local level or at national level, we have Open Data in the UK, Open Data Ireland, Open Data Scotland, Open Data almost at every country. Basically every country that is part of certain commercial agreements and political agreements, they have transparency laws. If they have transparency laws, they have to have 4 apples. I eat the 4 and we eat 2 each. That's really fair. We cannot keep the students just reading percents or producing percents on there. They need to understand slightly more complex statistical methods. And they need to understand what is the socio-political context of a problem or the economic problem within a context. So when you develop analytical skill and critical thinking through data, you make them question what the newspaper is saying. So you bring 5 newspapers, similar data set, okay, is there real evidence in here? Where they got the data? So show me your data is a bit of like, hey, I have the right to question you as a human being, as a citizen, mostly when we talk about politics. How you develop data literacy skills, how you make people understand what is a graph, what is the media, what is different sets of values, how you don't compare pears and apples. Use data, show them real data sets, work in teams. So you have to tell a story. When you work, for example, journalists are really good at doing these sort of things. It's data journalism. And The Guardian, honestly, I recommend you can every now and again read The Guardian data journalism reports because it's brilliant. A group of people having to tell a story. And that's a storytelling technique. So you can use it in either social sciences or formal sciences. You need to tell the story behind your research. And you need to make sure that people that is not in the academic context can understand it. If I read very complex information, very nicely processed because the data is clear for me and is properly analyzed and properly presented, reading The Guardian gives me lots of insight, even though I don't understand anything about that discipline. So you make your students work together. And when you kind of relate the social problems or real problems or global issues with your learning process, you develop global citizenship skills. Because your students are just not working with the textbook, with examples of things that potentially might happen in a records company or in a bank. You have the bank with the problem, you have the bankers using the money that the government gave them into big parties. It's not a fake example, it's reality. And sometimes reality bites and hurts a little bit. So we developed this beautiful sort of rubric with Leo, and it's all about how from first year to master's level, you can develop different layers of skills through open data. So critical thinking, data analysis, data curation. If you are unable as a citizen now to curate your data, how are you going to find something around? You cannot always go to the catalog or to the library and find a very kind librarian that might guide you. It's not going to work forever. You need to be able to retrieve your own data set, to retrieve and to synthesize and analyze information and then systematically decide what is good and what is not good for you. Data information, data management. For librarians like me, it's really easy. We've been trained for a few years on how to select and analyze and monitor data, but how you present that data, there is techniques to do data visualization. Okay, Excel gives you nice graphs, but you can do much better. And one of the beautiful things with infographics, that you say, oh yeah, but they're super over trendy. But if you have to explain to people that is not literate using design, how a disease spread, or how to stop a disease by spraying, like if you wash your hands and you have a design about washing your hands, if you clean your house, and you keep images to explain people that might not be as literate if they have like a set data set and just read information, it's really good to communicate. How many of us have seen a poster that is shockingly hard to read at an academic conference? And you are like, okay, why you didn't do an infographic? And you show your data in a much friendlier way, and just like, this is intimidating, loads of bubbles and reports and things and notes. No, actually, data visualization and project data in a much friendly way. It's a very, very useful technique. But also research skill, think again, think as a scientist. Question the method, try more method, fail, try again. I was experimenting with my students about, because of course I have to subject my post students to my own theories. And it's an academic writing course at Aga Khan University, and we used data journalism techniques to write reports instead of an essay, and the plagiarism rate was almost 0. Because I gave them a challenge. I needed them to report to me certain phenomena, honor killings in Pakistan, marital rape, we talk about developing teachers in Iran. So I needed certain set of data, and they need to contrast the data with the literature, and beautiful pieces of work came together. But it wasn't just an assignment that I can just tick boxes. I had to read it too. And they were contrasting data from OECD, UNESCO, World Bank, and then their own countries, and comparing literature. And that's a brilliant technique. Honestly, where it's really fine, there's almost no plagiarism, but you have to mark very carefully. Identify the challenge. If you want to teach using, if you're going to give it a try, you need to identify a challenge for you and for your students. You need to identify the learning outcomes. What do you want them to learn? Do you want them to learn to write reports? Then you need to focus on their report writing technique rather than the type of data they use. For example, do you want them to learn to find data? You need to identify the data portal. So you need to get a bit familiarized with it. But thanks for School of Data. Look for a School of Data. That'll help you and guide you through learning to use open data. And lots of tutorials for academics. They're really good. They're fantastic. But you need to describe the outcomes and the challenges that the students might face. So you avoid students getting really frustrated. It's like, oh, I was trying to find the data, but I couldn't. Okay, try another portal. Fine. And then you justify that on your research. Provide the training materials. Point them at School of Data. It's really good. Honestly, step-by-step tutorials on how to understand data. And support the students to communicate their findings with their communities. So blogging. So how much we talk about blogging in education. Students creating their own blogs and communicate their findings and communicate the research. That's a really good way to students to write research blogs and research logs and communicate with the community. So enhancing parking space in Coventry by understanding the data sets from the council. Little challenges, little things so they can progress while they progress in their degrees. And to learn more about open data, there is a handbook, really good, with lots of case studies. There is the Open Education handbook, so you can start understanding what's open education and then how to embed open data principles in it. Leo and I had a book. There is many portals. So if you just look for open data in Google, you'll find like lots of portals. So yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you. To the online audience, if you have any questions, please go to Twitter and use the hashtag Disruptive Bytes, and then we will be asking the questions. I have a few questions, but is there anyone in the audience who would like to ask any question, or shall I go first? Okay, well, I have one question for Javiera, and it's about the usefulness of open data, but for qualitative, with qualitative data, because my impression is that most of this is applying for quantitative approaches, but is there anything out there also of interest for people working with unstructured or qualitative data?
Yeah, absolutely. If you compare, for example, what people say, so you need to, because of course, open data is basically quantitative, but apparently it's just numbers, but most of the data is hidden in reports. So it's quite it's quite lucky that you just find the data set. Normally you have to dig into the reports and read the reports. In the middle of a report, you will find a data set that you will have to extract the table. Tabula is really good for that, and Tableau, great tools to get tables out of PDFs. It's fantastic. Free open software, use it. You see a report, a PDF, mark, take it off. So yeah, so this is why you compare the data with what is being said in the report, which is the qualitative aspect, because it's the words of the report, national, and then you compare with the tables, and it's like, are they just explaining their own way, or that's just actually reflecting what I said on the table? Because sometimes they love to publish these very long reports and hide the data in between. So it's actually, it's not that you get the data set. You need to be an investigator. You need to kind of navigate through the different formats of data, and sometimes it's just lots of PDFs.
What about interviews, for example? Because of course there are many challenges about ensuring confidentiality, anonymity. What is your take on the release of data interviews, for example?
I mean, I think that we'll see a lot more of this kind of data becoming available as higher education institutions move to making research data available, because there's probably a lot more of qualitative research where there's going to be that sort of data going on in universities than that sort of kind of thing. And so I think that remains to be seen. But I mean that obviously you won't be able to produce just hand over your data set in exactly the same form that you would keep it for yourself. I think, you know, there'll have to be anonymization of participants and all that kind of thing going on.
Did I understand you correctly when you mentioned about not enough licensing systems available for academics? Was that a criticism of Creative Commons? Can't you use that for more or less anything?
No, that wasn't a criticism of Creative Commons. It was what I was talking about was that in open educational resource repositories, which are fundamentally founded on the principle that you're sharing resources for the use and reuse of other people, that very often it doesn't actually allow you to apply licensing in the repository. So that was just an example of where sometimes the technical infrastructure of open education isn't quite keeping up with the theory of how we should be doing it. Yeah.
We have some questions from the audience as well. Okay.
Hi, I was just interested in you. You're talking about being able to share practices that have not gone well. And I wondered if you had any good examples of where you've seen people have taken the risk to share when things have failed, and in what sort of medium is that shared in a repository? I just wondered if you could share some examples.
Well, I think that's kind of an example of where it would be an interesting form of open practice. But isn't necessarily about creating a resource that you license. So that's why I was referring earlier to how I think that, you know, it doesn't help us to have a too narrow definition of what we mean about open educational practice, because I think that I think that's a kind of would be great to see more of that going on. I think that we'll do this with people that we know well, but not so much in a more public way, or, you know, not all the time. I'm one of the coordinators of a group of learning technologists in London that we decided that at the previous meeting that we wanted to have a theme of dreams and nightmares in learning technology, and so we were kind of calling for presentations about nightmare projects that went horribly wrong, and nobody would do one. So it was a shame. It would have been so interesting.
But on the other side, in the data world, we tend to share the experience of like, no, please don't do another hackathon just for the sake of doing a hackathon. Because we know so many hackathons that went so horribly wrong because they wanted to develop an app. There is a cemetery of apps. There's like, they develop an app for the sake of developing an app because everyone needs to have an app. They use data that was completely corrupted. And then the hackathon was a complete disaster. So yeah, talking about
you heard it here.
The study was brilliant. But if you talk about like things that people share openly about what not to do. Is like, you're going to do a hackathon, please don't. So you're going to have a support people that will tell you, no, you never have done a hackathon. You don't have a clear plan. You want to develop an app. Don't go there. If you're going to do a mapathon, so mapping through a hackathon is much more used. It was like, okay, just go and do maps. But don't go into a hackathon for the sake of doing a hackathon and doing an app, please. For the good of the community.
I have a couple of, comments pertaining academic cultural structure as an obstacle to these. Also, one pertains mapping. The first thing is that this kind of approach really questions the divide between teaching and researching, which, as someone with a background in education, I find pretty stupid, but it's still pushed a lot as universities are made. So I wanted to hear your take on that. And the other one is that, I have to justify this from a legal standpoint. A few days ago, I was, since I'm involved in a project about pervasive gaming, I was looking into cloud mapping practices. And so I came upon some methodologies and techniques which were implemented by citizen groups. So to produce data outside the normal, I went on one of those groups which monitor I think the British petroleum spill out. And I could go on the website, but the university system told me, okay, you can go to the website, but you have been logged because you have seen this website. So
why?
I don't know. It's a danger
But it was
for
the
national
university
security.
that blocked you accessing BP.
No, it didn't block me. If you want to see this website, we will log you. Okay, log me. So,
because actually, in a way or another, British Petroleum should give you access to their information. If not, you can always have the right to FOI, so freedom of information. This is the beautiful thing in England. Please keep it on. If you want to have data from some institutions that have subsidized by the government.
Yeah, but these
FOI.
weren't subsidized by the government. They were independent citizens that were doing a citizen science project with cloud mapping. So they weren't governmentally approved. So maybe that's why. So it's a kind of open data can be very much outside the normal infrastructure of.
Not really, because you never, except that you're doing a map with people's addresses. So that's violating the privacy. Any other sort of data that doesn't vulnerate someone's privacy and right to a private life shouldn't be a problem.
No, I'm all for the citizens monitoring.
Absolutely.
I do not need.
And if a company has a problem with that, that's a problem.
Okay.
They can oppose as much as they want.
Hi, Marina. I'll try and speak loudly because I can't hear the other questions, so I'll speak very loudly. Following on from that, open MOOCs. I've been working with MOOCs, and incidentally, there's a lot of research at the Higher Education Academy on open education resources and the fact that our students like us to use them. So there's plenty of evidence, and there is applied research saying that. But one thing I've encountered, I asked FutureLearn for analytics on the MOOC I was researching. What do you think they said in their big, massive, open online course?
Okay.
They said,
no.
No.
Of course, but
and I work with somebody who worked with them on a MOOC, but they still wouldn't give me access to the analytics.
If you read the terms and conditions of Coursera and all these massive MOOC providers, said anything that you produce for us is ours. And actually, there are federal laws from the United States protecting anything. So it's not open on the concept of openly licensed resources. You just give them for free everything. They just patent. If you read the terms and conditions, like nothing can be shared, copied, distributed. It's absolutely forbidden.
Which is why I think is a misnomer, open.
Absolutely.
Well,
in a MOOC,
what's
it's a
quite
bit of a
interesting
misnomer.
is that actually some of what we think of as the MOOC providers don't actually refer to what they're doing as MOOCs. They just call themselves free courses.
Yeah.
So,
and your question, why don't staff use them even if students want them and even if we know they work? Answers to me, they perceive it to be time consuming because it's an adjustment and a change to their normal curricular practice. And the other thing was it's not quality controlled, which, having seen some Future Learn and Coursera MOOCs, I can see that point. Okay, they just point to make.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Small question. And it's just about how you would go about encouraging people to kind of engage with open data and open education, because I think one of the big problems that me as a developer of games for learning and also as an academic is that we're always kind of told to be quite secretive with what we're doing until it's kind of gone out to the journals and gone out to that stage. But sometimes you want to know what's going on even in the early stages of the research. So how would you go about encouraging more people to kind of go about this open way of education?
There are just two things there. And we're both quite secretive on what we write. We won't tell much people what we're doing until it's done. But we will share the data that we use to produce also our papers. But this is research, and as a researcher, you have all the right to protect yourself. And during the process, you don't have to. Some people that actually have blogs about what they're writing, but they are not mostly more academics, and they have the confidence to do that. I'll freak out. But then it's about teaching. And about teaching is they're just about telling your colleagues, hey, my slides are up in my slide share if anyone wants to use them, or anyway, just things are there, just take them. It's just leaving cake on the table. You announce it a couple of times and people will take it. Then you just leave the cake and it will disappear in a matter of minutes. It's that people get used to get the cake on the table.
I just feel very different about that last comment. I think I'd positively encourage any student to be sharing what they're up to and getting critique on that and sharing it and getting feedback so that it can be embellished and enriched. So not for keeping secrets. And I think it's interesting you've had that experience, but mine would be very different. Always share, always talk it through. Don't hold back, because you're going to miss out on things that other people are saying, well, we've already done that.
Yeah,
so
no, but we mean when we're
let's not
writing
be
papers.
secretive.
When we're writing papers, you don't want the peer review. You already have to deal with your own peer reviewers and the second reviewer. So you don't want to deal with Twitter being your peer reviewer while you're writing a paper. So it's about keeping your...
Some people do.
Yeah, some people do. I cannot cope with that personally.
Probably depends on disciplines as well, and the nature of
I think you had a question.
I mean, yeah, to carry that bit of the conversation on, I'd be interested to know who's told you to be secretive about it. Publishers will tell you to be secretive about it because it's in their interests, not in your interest. So publishers will tell people to be secretive and not share because it's in their interest, because it's a walled garden that people have to pay to enter. I would totally echo what Catherine said, and it'd be interesting to talk to you afterwards about why. And I'm not sure if you were referring to yourself doing this, but if people are being private about what they're publishing and putting stuff on SlideShare, there's something very interesting that they've got to learn, which is that they just gave away all their intellectual property on SlideShare because SlideShare own it.
Yeah.
So I think there's a whole set of things that academics are trying to work through, and we all feel anxious and scared about it. But I would echo what's already been said. The more you share, the more benefit. So it would be really interesting to sort of pursue that bit of the conversation about how junior, and I know it is junior academics, feel quite threatened by that kind of idea that it's a pie and people are going to take it.
Yeah, but it also it's like we publish everything through open access journals. Luckily, as being learning technologists, we're not tied to the ref and give us levels of independence. But I don't know. I don't feel confident enough yet to pilot my methodology live on Twitter. I don't know. Maybe when I'm older and I'm more confident. But
I think. I mean, yeah. I think I think there's a difference between being quite open about what your research is about, what you're hoping to achieve, and sort of being in communication with other people about who have similar interests. I think we're very much involved in that kind of activity. But it's another thing maybe to be sort of like showing your early drafts. It's you know, there's layers of openness.
And layer of confidence too. So we tried to put everything as open as possible. And I was telling them, after I published my PhD, and I got my certificate and everything was done, I just shared the data. But I don't think I was able to share the data before, because I had enough with being with my supervisor questioning me about my process, and having an entire group of people questioning you. You need to keep your focus sometimes when you're doing research. So if you get too distracted asking for too many opinions, it might not be so beneficial. So share about what you're talking about. Share your interviews with people, but make sure that you keep a communication with your communities of practice, but don't try to openly open your methodology, because you might get too many opinions and you might get frustrated and you might end up taking 2 years to publish one paper. I don't know.
Hi. It's a very short question, but I think it's a very good one. High expectations. Sorry. So just a very, very brief point. My question is, from your point of view, can you involve students, for instance, in the preparation of a module, asking them, you know, this is open. Can you just suggest any kind of content, topics? Are we prepared for that from your experience?
Yeah. There are definitely people who do that, and people who report really really great success. I think the person, if I'm not mistaken, that I've been reading about this quite recently was Kathy Davidson, who said that in a module that she's been teaching for a few years, every cohort design part of that module every year, and she said it's like it's never a disappointment, because they bring all kinds of ideas to it that she wouldn't have thought of. So it's really you know, I guess the idea is that you're co-creating the curriculum, and that you're kind of crowdsourcing interesting ideas from people. One of the things that was quite interesting in this thing that I read as well was that she said when she first started doing this, she would be there when the students were discussing it, and then one of them said to her, you know, we really need you to not be here while we're talking about this, and so she actually sort of has to remove herself while they kind of have this debate amongst themselves, and what so they can present something that they feel is finished. So I think that ties in sort of with the point before about, you know, there's an open practice that's going on, but some people don't necessarily want every single stage to be under some kind of microscope. You might want to share when you're ready. So.
Yeah, and the thing is, like, also involving the students from the previous year to ask them directly where I can improve. And actually, some of the students, our students, produce great materials, and this is a building knowledge with the students together. So, can I use your materials? I will attribute them to you. So you kind of give them a badge of content production, and you put trace out, this is what my students did last year. So you build up on also what the students do for the presentations. Almost every course have a presentation, and they use slides or videos, and they do materials. Keep them, help, and they will be really useful for you to build up for the upcoming year. And it's shared of knowledge between students. It's a student building of content for all the students. So I think this is a great way to keep connecting with the people that once was your student.
Okay, well, any other questions? We are running out of time. So thank you very much to our speakers, and thank you very much for your questions as well. And I think we should give an applause to them.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, open Creative Commons license. So trademarked.